Picture the scene. You're standing in front of a crowd, all eyes on you. Some await your benevolence, others fear your decision. And in that moment, a question echoes, one that has crossed centuries and still haunts the soul of every leader, every influencer, everyone entangled in the invisible web of power. Is it better to be loved or feared?
This is not just a political dilemma, it's a key to understanding human relationships in their rawest form, because whether we like it or not, we're surrounded by invisible games of dominance, desire, envy, and submission, and woven through all of these threads, Niccolo Machiavelli laid out a way of thinking that many prefer to ignore, but that still pulses with uncomfortable honesty. A ruler should strive to be feared and respected, but never hated. Today, we dive into the dark wisdom of one of the most misunderstood thinkers in history. We'll cross the line between morality and power and understand why Machiavelli still speaks loudly in a world obsessed with approval, where fear often works better than 1,000 sweet words. But before you judge him, listen, because maybe, just maybe, he understood something that few dare to admit. Human nature is not made of ideals, it's made of instincts. And those who ignore this lose the game before it even begins. Let's begin. When people hear the name Machiavelli, they often think of coldness, manipulation, and cynicism. Machiavellian became a synonym for ruthless strategy. But that's just the surface. Machiavelli wasn't an advocate for evil. He was a cartographer of reality, a man who lived through chaos, betrayal, and war. Instead of painting a utopian portrait of power, he dared to describe how it actually works. In The Prince, the work that made him immortal, he doesn't give advice for saints. He speaks to leaders. And a leader, he says, cannot afford to be naive. He must understand that loyalty is fickle, that people are inconsistent, and that ideals crumble when tested by fear, pain, or ambition. He saw humans through the eyes of someone who had seen too much, someone who knew that behind the moral mask, what truly drives us are our ambitions, fears, and primal needs. Machiavelli disturbs us because he removes the makeup of virtue and shows us the naked face of the human condition. He says bluntly, if you want to rule, if you want to influence, if you want to survive in a world where everyone is playing a game, you better learn to play too. But that doesn't mean you must be dirty. It means you must be real. That's why his ideas have lasted over 5 centuries. Because truth, even uncomfortable, always finds space in those willing to see the world without illusions. Machiavelli doesn't teach you to betray. He teaches you how not to be betrayed. If there was one thing Machiavelli feared more than losing power, it was becoming hated, because fear can be managed. It can be transformed into respect, but hate is a slow-acting poison. Once rooted, it breeds resentment and a thirst for revenge. Machiavelli knew a ruler could be firm, but not cruel. He could impose respect, but never humiliate, because humiliation is the soil where hatred grows, and those who are hated are always, eventually, betrayed. He warned, never interfere with people's families or property. You can bruise their pride, but not their deepest attachments, because when fear is mixed with a sense of injustice, it turns into resentment, and resentment doesn't die easily. In today's polarized world, it's easy to see how hatred destroys leadership. It blinds, it distorts, it turns leaders into enemies and dialogue into war. Even during the Renaissance, Machiavelli understood You can rule with firmness, but without empathy, you will fall. Be feared? Yes. Be hated? Never. Fear creates distance. Hate creates enemies, and enemies never forget. This is where Machiavelli offers one of power's harshest truths. Leadership demands emotional intelligence. Coldness, when it goes too far, carries a heavy price. After all, you can't rule over ashes, and a leader who is hated, even if seated on a throne, is already collapsing on the inside. Is it better to be loved or feared? It's the question that cuts to the heart of the prince, but beyond that, it reveals a fundamental human tension. Machiavelli's answer is brutally clear. It is much safer to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. But what does he really mean? Love is fragile. It depends on mutual affection, empathy, and shared feeling. It's beautiful, but it's unpredictable. Fear, on the other hand, is more reliable. It sets boundaries. It discourages betrayal. It creates structure. Machiavelli knew that to maintain power, you need stability. And the human heart is not always trustworthy, but this isn't a call to cruelty. It's a call to psychological clarity. In a world where many bend to be liked, the one who sets clear limits often earns more respect and, ironically, sometimes more admiration. Love draws people close. Fear keeps them from stabbing you in the back. Balanced wisely, these forces create a kind of quiet authority, a presence that doesn't need to shout, because it simply is. This is not an invitation to hardness, but to maturity. It reminds us that to be loved at the cost of respect is a dangerous trade, and to be feared with fairness may be the most secure path to real respect. There are people who walk into a room and change the energy without saying a word. It's not the volume of their voice, it's not their status, it's the way they inhabit their own presence. There's something you can't quite name, but everyone feels it. Respect. Machiavelli, though known for his political strategies, understood this subtle kind of power. True respect is never demanded, it's not begged for, it's emitted. It doesn't come from shouting, it comes from inner coherence. We live in an era of too much noise and too little presence. Many scream to be heard, few can sit in silence and still be felt. True respect doesn't come from brutality, it comes from integrity. It doesn't come from causing fear, but from inspiring caution. Respect is what we feel in the presence of someone who knows themselves, someone who doesn't need to prove anything. They simply are. It's the invisible art of knowing your limits and making others feel them without aggression. It's the quiet firmness of someone who understands that power is not about controlling others. It's about mastering yourself. This kind of respect isn't earned with big gestures. It's built with consistency, with measured words, with the rare ability to say no without apology, to walk away without drama, to set boundaries without conflict. Machiavelli may never have used these exact words, but his ideas echo the same truth. The most powerful person is the one who doesn't need to show power. Because when you can inspire respect without raising your voice, you've already won the game wars before it even starts. You don't have to be a ruler, a king, or a head of state to apply Machiavelli's ideas. In fact, today's prince might be a team leader, a teacher, a business owner, or someone simply trying to maintain dignity in complicated personal relationships. Because every relationship carries some dynamic of power, and ignoring that isn't virtue, it's naivety. Being respected in the modern world is often a matter of knowing how to set boundaries, of speaking with clarity, of never putting yourself in situations where you have to beg for recognition or plead for your own worth. Machiavellian. Strategy isn't about manipulation, it's about clarity of purpose, about knowing what you want and pursuing it with emotional intelligence. It's understanding that not everyone will like you and that this isn't just okay, it's necessary. Because when you try to please everyone, you lose yourself. But when you're clear, calm, and consistent, you begin to radiate natural authority. And that is more rare than ever. People who don't over-explain, who say yes with conviction and no with peace, who leave when they need to and without resentment, who stay without submission. These people are not common. They're unforgettable. The modern prince is someone who leads without dominating, who inspires without trying to convince, who creates presence through stillness. Because in the end, real power lies in knowing exactly who you are and needing no one's permission to be. There's a fine, almost invisible line between fear and resentment, and crossing it is easier than you think. Machiavelli, with uncomfortable precision, warned that any person in a position of leadership must be extremely careful in how they use fear, because poorly handled fear turns into bitterness, and bitterness turns into hatred, and hatred is a patient enemy. It waits in silence. It remembers everything. It never forgets. Fear can be functional when it's paired with respect, but when fear is used to humiliate, to control, to dominate, it doesn't protect anymore. It corrupts. Respect fades. Fear becomes revenge. In practice, this means that leadership by fear alone is doomed. It may work for a while, it may look efficient, but an empire built on extreme fear is a glass empire. A single crack, and everything shatters. The key is balance, to be firm but fair, to set boundaries, but listen, to say no, but know how to apologize, because real authority isn't about being flawless, it's about knowing how to correct mistakes without losing dignity. The line between fear and hate is the line that separates a great leader from a tyrant. And understanding that might be the most important lesson for anyone who wants to influence with consistency, not coercion. There is a way to wield power without losing your humanity. A path where firmness and compassion don't contradict. They complement each other. Machiavelli, though often seen as cold and pragmatic, never encouraged cruelty for its own sake. What he proposed was not heartlessness, but clarity. The problem is how often his philosophy is misread, as if he claimed that to be respected, one must be ruthless. But what Machiavelli truly saw was this: you can't lead hearts with empty speeches, you can't impose lasting order through violence, and you can't govern minds with charm alone. Power with humanity understands the long game. It knows that every action creates a memory, every decision becomes a story someone tells, and in the end, what sustains any form of leadership isn't fear itself, it's the perception of justice. Justice here not as romantic ideal, but as consistency, firmness, reliability. People don't fear leaders who set rules, they fear leaders who change the rules based on their mood. That's why real power is born from quiet consistency. Not from being feared, but from being understood as fair. A leader, or any person who holds influence, must be seen as trustworthy even if they are not likable. And that's the essence of human power, not surrendering to the whims of popularity, but also not losing yourself in the intoxication of control. Greatness is not about being feared, it's about being remembered with respect. Even in your absence, it's about building a presence that doesn't need to shout, because its weight is felt in silence. When power is exercised with humanity, it doesn't dominate, it guides. And those who guide with integrity remain long after they've left the room. In the end, what people remember isn't the volume of your voice, but the strength of your silence. Not how much you forced your way, but how gracefully you held your ground. The most lasting presence is not the one that shines the brightest, but the one that knew when brightness was no longer needed. Machiavelli left us with a truth that's uncomfortable, but necessary. It's possible to be respected and feared without ever being hated. It's possible to lead with power without being authoritarian. But that path demands a rare virtue, self-awareness. To know when to speak and when to be still, when to act, and when to observe, when to assert yourself, and when to simply let others feel who you are. Because in the game of power, the thing that impresses most isn't the performance, it's the coherence. The calm that doesn't flinch in chaos, the firmness that needs no theater. The posture that commands respect, without asking for it. Whether at work, in relationships, or in your own inner world, Machiavelli invites us to live with more clarity, to understand that empathy doesn't solve everything, but that nothing lasts without it. The steady gaze, the measured silence, the kind of respect you never have to request. This is the new power, and those who cultivate it, even if they don't wear a crown, become kings of themselves. If this reflection resonated with you, if at any point you felt like Machiavelli was describing the world around you, or even your internal dilemmas, then this is the time to act, like this video, so it can reach others who also need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel if you want, to keep diving into ideas that go beyond the surface, ideas that transform. And in the comments, tell us, what was the biggest lesson you took from Machiavelli today? And if you want to take the next step, watch the video right here. What really happens when you become untouchable? A dive into the quiet strength of someone who no longer needs to react to everything. Because in the end, respect begins the moment you stop begging for it, and the world always notices when you decide to become unshakable.